My dad works at NASA. The words hung in the air for a moment, and then came the laughter. But no one was laughing by the end of the day. It was career week at Willow Creek Elementary, and excitement buzzed through Ms. Worthington's third-grade classroom. Kids were lined up on the reading rug, eager to share what their parents did for a living. 8-year-old Jordan Miles sat a little straighter than usual, his brown eyes wide with anticipation. He had rehearsed this moment in front of the mirror the night before, practicing how to say it just right. When Mr. Andrews, their teacher, called on him, Jordan puffed out his chest. "My dad," he announced proudly, "works at NASA." For a heartbeat, the room fell quiet. Then came a snort, a giggle, and then the low chuckle from Mr. Andrews himself. "NASA, huh?" he said with raised eyebrows. "Well, that's quite the imagination, Jordan. Maybe next time we shoot for something a little more realistic." Laughter rippled through the classroom. One girl repeated "more realistic" in a mocking tone. Jordan's voice vanished. His shoulders sank. The drawing he had made, his dad holding Earth and a satellite, suddenly felt silly. But what no one in that classroom knew was this: Jordan hadn't lied. His dad really did work at NASA. And before the day was over, the truth would walk through that classroom door wearing a badge that would silence the room. Jordan sat in silence for the rest of the morning, barely responding when Mr. Andrews asked questions or when the other kids whispered and giggled during math time. Just an hour ago, he'd been bouncing in his seat, eager to share. Now he wanted nothing more than to disappear into the carpet beneath him. Even during lunch, Jordan didn't eat. His sandwich sat untouched, and he kept his eyes down as the other boys raced toward the swings or did silly dances near the vending machines. What hurt the most wasn't just the laughter. It was how easily Mr. Andrews, the person who was supposed to believe in him, had written him off. No questions. No curiosity. Just dismissal. But what Mr. Andrews didn't realize was that Jordan wasn't making anything up. His dad, Dr. Marcus Miles, was an aerospace engineer who had spent the last year working on a deep space communication relay for NASA. He wore a NASA badge to work every single day. And every evening, he'd sit with Jordan at the kitchen table, explaining orbital patterns and satellites in the simplest, most fascinating ways. 3 days earlier, Jordan had been in the garage watching his dad untangle a mess of old wires. He sat on an overturned milk crate, sipping on a Capri Sun. "So if the rover sends a message from Mars," Jordan asked, "how long does it take to get here?" Dr. Miles didn't even look up. "Depends on where Mars is in orbit. Anywhere between 5 to 20 minutes. Jordan's eyes widened. "So it's like texting with bad service?" Marcus laughed. "Exactly. Space has terrible Wi-Fi." That's what Jordan loved about his dad. He could take something so complicated, radio waves traveling through millions of miles of space, and make it sound fun. He never talked down to him, never made him feel too young to understand. Later that night, Jordan had asked if he could bring one of his dad's NASA folders to school. "I want to show them what you do," he said. Dr. Miles shook his head gently. "Can't bring classified material to third-grade Bud. But you don't need any of that. You've got your voice. Just tell them what I do and tell them you're proud." "But what if they don't believe me?" Jordan had asked. His dad leaned back, resting one elbow on the kitchen table. "Then that's their problem, not yours." Jordan wrote down everything he wanted to say for Career Week Satellite's Orbit Mars Relay. He drew a picture of a rocket ship and even a cartoon of space Wi-Fi, just for laughs. He practiced in front of the bathroom mirror with all the confidence he could muster. But none of that mattered once Mr. Andrews laughed. Now Jordan sat in class, palms sweaty, bouncing his knees, hoping. No begging that his dad would still show up. Every few minutes he'd glance at the clock or sneak a look at the classroom door. "Please, Dad. Please don't be late. Please prove them wrong." Career presentations began after lunch. Chloe's mom, who owned a bakery, brought in cupcakes and cookie-shaped business cards. Thomas' uncle, a mechanic, passed around a tire gauge like it was pirate treasure. The class clapped, cheered, and asked questions. Jordan barely noticed. His heart was pounding too loud in his ears. When Mr. Andrews announced the next parent, he stopped mid-sentence. The classroom door creaked open. And there he was, Dr. Marcus Miles stepped into the room wearing a navy blazer, crisp white shirt, and slacks. But what caught everyone's eye was the shiny NASA badge clipped to his chest. His presence was quiet, steady, but commanding. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on his son. Jordan sat up so fast his chair scraped the floor. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He just stared. Dr. Miles gave a small nod. No big speech, just calm, focused presence. "Hello," he said loud and clear. "I am Dr. Miles. I designed spacecraft." And just like that, the room fell silent. Not in disbelief, but in realization. Mr. Andrews blinked frozen at the front of the class with a clipboard he suddenly didn't know what to do with. The teacher who had laughed now couldn't find words. His posture sagged ever so slightly as Dr. Miles walked to the front of the class, not to scold, not to boast, but simply to show the truth that no one had believed. Jordan's fists, clenched all morning, finally relaxed. The shame began to fade. Because now everyone would see exactly who his dad was, and more importantly, who he had been telling the truth about all along. And class was about to get a lesson they'd never forget. Dr. Marcus Miles didn't need flashy props or wild hand gestures to win the class over. All he had to do was stand at the front of the room and speak, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. "I help design spacecraft systems that keep missions connected to Earth." He began, his voice calm, yet full of quiet authority. "When a rover lands on Mars, or a satellite is orbiting deep space, someone has to make sure it can talk to us. That's my job." A few hands shot up, curiosity replacing the earlier mockery. One boy blurted out, "Do you fly rockets?" prompting a gentle chuckle from Dr. Miles. "Not exactly. I don't fly them, but I help build the tools that let the people flying them stay in touch with us back on Earth." Another kid asked, "Like space iPhones?" That earned real laughter. Even Jordan cracked a smile. "Sure," Dr. Miles replied, smiling. "Space iPhones with really bad reception." He clicked a button on the smartboard, revealing a photo of the Mars Relay Project satellites floating in deep orbit, carefully arranged across a star-speckled background. Another slide showed a control panel, rows of blinking lights and switches. The last image, a snapshot of him and Jordan at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab booth, wearing matching NASA badges, grinning proudly. Jordan beamed. His shoulders, which had drooped all day, now sat square. His classmates stared in awe, some whispering, "That's his dad," as realization finally dawned. But the one person in the room who wasn't joining in was Mr. Andrews. He stood off to the side, quiet now, the clipboard hanging awkwardly at his side. His eyes darted between the screen and Jordan, a flicker of discomfort settling into his usually composed expression. The smugness was gone. So was the smirk. What remained was the growing weight of his earlier comment. Dr. Miles didn't mention what had happened. He didn't need to. His presence, his badge, and the way Jordan now held himself, it all spoke louder than anything he could have said. But just before wrapping up, Dr. Miles paused. He looked directly at the class and said, "By the way, I heard someone earlier say that working at NASA might not be very realistic." He let that word hang in the air, heavy with meaning. Then he turned toward his son and added with a slight smile, "Well, I guess some people have a different definition of what's realistic." It landed, hard. Jordan's classmates looked around, shifting in their seats. Even the ones who'd laughed before were now quiet, because there was no denying the truth anymore. Mr. Andrews cleared his throat. "Thank you, Dr. Miles." That was informative. But his voice had lost its usual confidence. Dr. Miles gave a polite nod. "I've got to head back. Mars doesn't like to be kept waiting." A few kids laughed, and Dr. Miles walked toward the door. Just before stepping out, he paused next to Mr. Andrews. "I hope your students always feel heard," he said quietly, "especially the ones who dream big." And then he was gone. Jordan sat, tall hands folded on his desk, pride quietly radiating off him. For the first time all day, he felt fully seen, not just by his classmates, but by his teacher. Mr. Andrews stood frozen for a moment longer, staring at the door, realizing he had just learned one of the hardest lessons a teacher could You don't get to decide which dreams are too big. And sometimes reality walks in wearing a NASA badge. The final bell rang, and chairs screeched against the floor as students rushed to grab their backpacks and head for the buses. The classroom buzzed with leftover excitement from the last presentation. Dr. Marcus Miles' visit had left a mark. Kids were still talking about Mars relays and space iPhones, but Jordan Miles stayed seated at his desk, calm and quiet. He wasn't basking in glory. He wasn't gloating. He just sat still as if grounding himself after a whirlwind of emotion. For a boy who had spent most of the day shrinking into his chair, he now looked completely different. Shoulders back, head up, eyes clear. He had nothing more to prove. Mr. Andrews lingered at the whiteboard, pretending to erase notes, but his eyes kept drifting toward Jordan. Eventually, when most of the class had filtered out, he walked over, hands tucked awkwardly into the pockets of his khakis. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than it had been all day. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Jordan looked up, guarded but polite. "Okay." The teacher sat on the edge of the desk next to him, sighing through his nose like he didn't know where to start. "Your dad seems like a pretty impressive guy." Jordan didn't reply immediately. He tilted his head slightly. "He is." Mr. Andrews nodded, eyes on the floor. "Yeah, I can see that." A beat passed. Then he added, "Listen, I owe you an apology." Jordan looked at him now, really looked. His face was neutral, unreadable. Mr. Andrews continued. "What I said earlier when you mentioned your dad worked at NASA." I laughed. "And I shouldn't have. That wasn't okay." Jordan didn't say anything at first. He let the silence stretch. "But you did laugh," he finally said. Those 4 words landed like a punch. Mr. Andrews' jaw tightened. "Yeah," he admitted. "I did. And it was wrong. I didn't mean to make you feel small or like I didn't believe in you. I made a snap judgment. And that judgment was based on something that had more to do with me than with you." Jordan raised an eyebrow, slightly intrigued. "Like what?" The teacher shifted his weight on the desk. "I think sometimes adults forget how powerful our words are. Or maybe we assume things we shouldn't. Maybe we look at a kid and don't see the whole picture. That's what I did. I didn't expect a kid from my class to say their dad worked at NASA. And instead of asking more or showing curiosity, I laughed it off." He paused. "That laugh had probably told you that your truth wasn't believable. And I'm sorry for that." Jordan stared at him for a long moment, then said, "You said to aim for something more realistic." Mr. Andrews winced. "I remember. And I regret it. I really do." Jordan nodded slowly, processing. "You know, I ripped up my drawing, the one I was going to show the class. I was really proud of it." Mr. Andrews swallowed hard. "I wish you hadn't felt like you had to do that." Jordan glanced at his backpack. "I don't need it now." They saw the real thing. The teacher smiled faintly. They sure did. A moment passed between them, quiet, not awkward, but heavy with mutual understanding. Mr. Andrews stood up, brushing invisible dust off his pants. "I hope you'll give me a chance to do better." Jordan rose too, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. He took a few steps toward the door, then turned slightly over his shoulder. "It wasn't my imagination," he said, voice steady. "That's really my dad." And then he walked out. Mr. Andrews stayed there, staring at the empty desk. In that quiet classroom with nothing left to distract him, the weight of his earlier words pressed in. He hadn't just doubted a student, he had nearly silenced a dream. And no test, no worksheet, no curriculum objective could undo what that moment might have done to a kid's confidence. It was humbling, and it was deserved. Because sometimes the biggest lessons aren't the ones written on a whiteboard, they're the ones handed to you by a 3rd grader who just wanted someone to believe him. The next morning, the desert sun rose over Chandler, Arizona, casting golden streaks across the rooftops. In the Miles household, breakfast was quiet but not heavy like the day before. Jordan sat at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal, his spoon lazily swirling through the milk. Across from him, his father, Dr. Marcus Miles, leaned against the counter, sipping from a chipped mug that read "Space Nerd" in bold navy letters. "Did you hear him?" Jordan asked suddenly, not looking up. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Your teacher?" Jordan nodded. When I said you worked at NASA, he laughed, like it was some kind of joke. Marcus didn't answer right away. He set the mug down gently, walked over, and pulled out the chair across from his son. Yeah, he said finally. I heard. Jordan's eyes flicked up. Why do people do that? Why do they laugh like something's impossible? Marcus took a slow breath. Because sometimes people live in small boxes, son, and anything that doesn't fit inside those boxes feels threatening or funny. Jordan frowned. It didn't feel funny. No, Marcus agreed. It never does when you're on the other side of it. There was a pause. Then Jordan added quietly, I didn't feel smart anymore. I didn't even want to tell them about your work. Marcus leaned in, his voice gentle but firm. Don't let someone else's doubt erase your truth. You know who you are. You know who I am. That's all that matters. Jordan nodded just a little, but the message landed deep. At school, things had shifted. Kids who had once snickered were now full of questions. One asked if Jordan's dad had ever met an astronaut. Another wanted to know what a Mars relay system really did. Jordan answered them simply, no bragging, no theatrics, just the truth. The same truth he had shared from the start. At recess, Mila walked beside him and said with a smirk, They believe you now. Jordan shrugged. They didn't have to. Mila grinned. Still nice, though. Meanwhile, in the staff lounge, Mr. Andrews sat at the corner table staring at a folded piece of notebook paper. He had written it 3 times before settling on the final version. No email, no printout, just his handwriting raw and direct. After lunch, Jordan found the note tucked into his cubby. It read, Jordan, I was wrong. You shouldn't have had to prove anything to us. Keep dreaming big, Mr. Andrews. Jordan didn't smile, didn't reread it. He folded it once, slipped it into his backpack, and zipped it shut. He hadn't needed the apology, but maybe someone else had needed to say it. When the final bell rang, Jordan walked out of Prescott Elementary with his backpack slung over one shoulder, head held high. Not because his classmates finally believed him, but because he had never stopped believing in himself. At home, as the Arizona sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus and Jordan sat on the porch steps, watching the sky turn shades of lavender and orange. A faint star twinkled into view, Venus probably. Jordan pointed to it. Do you think I could ever work at NASA too? He asked. Marcus smiled. If you want to, absolutely. But whatever you choose, just promise me one thing. Jordan looked at him. What? Never shrink your dreams to fit into someone else's box. Jordan smiled back, a real full smile this time. I won't. The next week at Prescott Elementary felt different. Not because the rules had changed, but because something more important had. The way the kids looked at Jordan had shifted. He was no longer just the quiet kid who liked space. He was the boy who spoke the truth when no one believed him, and was proven right. Even Mr. Andrews seemed changed. He no longer brushed off the students' dreams with a chuckle or a raised eyebrow. Instead, he asked better questions, listened more closely, and most importantly, stopped underestimating the size of a child's imagination. One afternoon, during science class, Jordan raised his hand to answer a question. Mr. Andrews called on him immediately this time, with a smile that wasn't patronizing, but respectful. Jordan answered confidently, and the class listened. At recess, Mila sat next to him on the swings and said, You know, I think your dad changed more than just our class. Jordan laughed. He didn't say much. Exactly, she replied. That's why it worked. Sometimes the strongest voices are the ones that don't shout, they just show up with truth. Jordan didn't need to yell to be believed. He just needed courage and the quiet power of someone who had his back. In life, you'll face people who doubt you, not because you're wrong, but because their world is too small to hold your dreams. That's their limitation, not yours. Speak your truth anyway. Has someone ever dismissed your dreams or tried to make you feel small? How did you respond? Share your story in the comments. We want to hear it. And if you believe in the power of truth, courage, and big dreams, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. We're building a space where every voice matters, especially yours.